Today, Chloe and I are joined by exercise physiologist and pain researcher Brendan Mouatt. We talk about the notion of antifragility and how we can apply that to improve our client outcomes, how what we say and even things that we don't say can influence our clients' well-being, and we go down a whole fascinating rabbit hole about what is pain. Coming right up. Hey, Chloe.
Hey, Raph. How you going?
Fucking awesome.
Fucking awesome. We're gonna get this show on the road with a bang. I am not so bad. I'm excited that we've got Brendan here.
Hey, Brendan.
Hey guys. I'm excited too.
It's awesome to see you.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a bit of time between chats, so yeah, I'm excited to.
It has.
Have a bit of a chat.
I almost thought we weren't friends anymore, Brendan. It had been like, it's like, where's Brendan? And then.
Oh, that's cute. I love that you thought we were friends at one point in time. No, absolutely. We don't talk enough, but I always love catching up with you guys. So.
Brendan.
It's definitely setting the tone.
Can you tell the folks at home a little brief who you are and your history and what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently living in Adelaide. So I moved over here a few years ago. So my background was I went and did exercise science, and then went and did a master's of exercise physiology, and really did it because I wanted to be helping people. Loved exercise and thought that was going to be a really cool modality to work with. And from there, worked as an exercise physiologist for quite some time, still do, work clinically. And I've always really loved that side of things, but there was a part where I also felt really quite challenged in my journey of, conflicting ideas and research that was suggesting that maybe the way that I practice and was using exercise and explaining exercise to people may have not been the best way of going about it. And I guess science was this thing that really helped me and challenged me in so many different ways that I've now gone back and I did another master's of research in exercise and perception, and now I'm currently doing my PhD over here in Adelaide at UniSA. So I guess in a nutshell, that's sort of my background. We've got a couple of clinical practices, multidisciplinary practices, and exercise facilities, I guess, in Melbourne. And we also run the Knowledge Exchange, which is like a continuing education for health and movement professionals as well on different pain and musculoskeletal related topics that we've found to be really kind of helpful in terms of the content was stuff that's challenged us in the past and really changed how we work with people now.
And is Tasha Stanton supervising your PhD?
Yeah, so Tasha Stanton and Lorimer Mosley.
What a double name drop there.
Oh, I know. How lucky am I to be working with those guys who are unreal. And I've got another supervisor that's just come on board named Felicity Braithwaite, and she's also someone worth looking up if you haven't heard of her before. But she's done some really cool stuff with placebo and placebo dry needling and all that kind of cool stuff too. So
I love a good placebo dry needling.
Yeah, me
it's
too.
It's the only kind, really.
The one time I had dry needling, it was bloody awful. I remember it really hurt, and I kind of remember thinking, and the practitioner was like, "Oh no, the more it hurts, the better. The better it's working." I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel quite right to me. But anyway, I didn't get any placebo effect from it, just pain.
Maybe I don't know how much of interest it is to people, but it's interesting to me, so I'm going to share it. That Brendan and I met would have been 2014 or 2015, something like that. When I did my Masters of Clinical Exercise Physiology, I did my placement with Brendan and his business partner, Luke. And that was 500 hours of clinical placement that I had to do. And, these guys started their sessions at 6 a.m, first session of the day. So I used to get up some ungodly hour, leave home at 5 on my bike, ride to the pitch black and arrive, and we'd spend all day together seeing clients. And I think for all of us, that year and maybe the following year were the year that was the time where we really kind of shifted, and like you said, Brendan, sort of started questioning the narrative around what we'd been doing with our clients, and kind of woke up to modern evidence-based, guideline-based care. And so, I feel like you and Luke, Postural of the Biomechanics, and I kind of all, I don't know, came out at the same time. So yeah,
what a way to put it. Yeah, absolutely. I remember you kind of coming in, and it's probably like the one placement student that we've had where we learnt probably just as much, if not more, from you throughout that. And obviously we've stayed in touch since, and the amount that you've kind of challenged us with, and the discussions, it's been really meaningful. And I think I can speak for Luke with this as well, in terms of our own figuring out our philosophy of how we practice and how we run business and how we combine healthcare and all of those sorts of things. You've been a huge big part of that. So and I can probably speak for a lot of your community as well, that you are very influential in that. But from my first-hand experience, that it's been fun to have you along for the ride. And
right back at you, big fella. So Chloe,
sorry, I was waiting for someone to pump my wings a little bit. Yeah. There was like a what about my influence on you, Brendan?
Sorry, I think I was just saying just before we started about how you're the little sister that I never asked for, but not really. I say that with so much affection. I love listening to your podcast and what you guys do. So, you're doing awesome things.
Do you still listen to the podcast, Chloe?
Do I still listen to our podcast?
Yeah.
Of course, yes. I don't know what's the right answer. I feel like I got totally caught off guard. Sometimes. When we first started recording, I was listening to it a lot. And then there's a lot. Sometimes I've heard enough of my voice, Raf, because I also watch my lectures back. I watch my masterclasses back for quality control. It's like I'm watching all of that. And then if I'm, it's a lot. But I really love listening to the episodes where I'm not part of the episode, and I definitely listen to those. I don't think I saw myself very well there. I don't know. Do you listen to them?
Yeah, I'm the same. I listened to them when we first started, because we're kind of working out our audio quality and our, I was trying to figure out if I said too much or anything like that. But after a while, I just kind of got to the point where I couldn't face it. I was like, no, I can't listen to another one.
I'd be interested. Well, that's the thing too. And when I do listen back to myself, like anyone who listens to themselves, I'm sure you pick up on repeat words, you pick up on little nuances of your personality and whatnot, and sometimes it becomes a little annoying if you're listening to it. I don't know, but I guess I wonder what other podcasters do. I wonder if they listen. Brendan, you've got a podcast.
Yeah, Dan Arbilla actually does most of the interviews on that, so I only occasionally jump on and do one. So I really struggle to listen back to me talking, because the same thing, you hear those ticks and whatever, and I think that's really good to listen to that, but it's kind of frustrating and uncomfortable as well, all at the same time.
I think that's really normal human behaviour, and I know there's I always think back, there's quite a few famous actors who have never, ever watched their movies.
I was watching an interview with Maggie Smith, who was on Downton Abbey. She's a mega famous actor, and she's been on a bunch of stuff. And they were saying, what's your favourite Downton Abbey episode? She's like, I've never seen any of them. I don't ever watch myself.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wow. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about?
Well, I want to pick Brendan's brain on all the exciting, cool shit he's doing, basically in Adelaide with the phenomenal group he's working with. I'd love to talk to Brendan about fragility versus antifragility, and some practical tips that our listeners can use when working with their clients to help facilitate basically fearless movement and not do the opposite and potentially nocebo their clients. So I'd love to talk about that. Be interested to hear a bit. You've been quite involved with Pain Revolution as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Sort of as a volunteer, running workshops as well. And I guess, I'm not sure how much your listeners know about it, but Pain Revolution is a community outreach initiative, I suppose, that Professor Lorimer Mosley, so the head of our research group, initiated about 5 or 6 years ago. And the idea is to go out to rural Australian communities that are most strongly hit by pain. So the highest opioid uses is one metric that's kind of used to sort of determine that. But we also know that the prevalence of chronic pain or persistent pain in rural communities is much higher than in actual cities. So it's about going out there and bringing contemporary understandings of pain to them, and so that they've got good resources. But also a part of what we were doing was running seminars and workshops for local general practitioners and allied health providers, so that they were on board and providing consistent information and assistance and support to these people who are suffering from pain, so that they're not getting mistreated, or they're at least getting access to best current practices when treating pain. And so, my role in that so far has been running workshops for practitioners. And
have you got on the bike, or only Luke?
Only Luke's jumped on the bike. Lauren has been trying to persuade me for a while, and as much as I love cycling...
So to give context to our listeners, the Pain Revolution also includes a group of cyclists who are also pain educators. Is that the right thing to say?
Yeah, a mixture of practitioners and pain educators that are fundraising, essentially, So they don the lycra to raise money to help rural practitioners basically upskill in these areas and provide the support to.
So did you get to go in a car alongside them and just kind of hurl some abuse at Luke as you're going past, kind of thing? Like, can't you go faster up that hill, mate? Sort of, is that how it worked, or?
Not for me. I was kind of doing a lot of the community-based stuff, so we'd go ahead of the riders and let them suffer it out. So we did the real work, to be fair, while they just enjoyed their long rides each day and rolled in, had dinner, and was all catered for. No, they do a fantastic job. And so, it is a big fundraising initiative. And really, if you haven't heard about it before, have a look at it, because it is the leading cause of disability in the world. And it's a big issue. And they're doing really cool stuff, at least in Australia so far, but also trying to branch out into a few other.
We can link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. So you mentioned there a contemporary understanding of pain. So can you sum up, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's coming to recognise that when we experience pain, that it is not just due to a tissue or a structure in our body being compromised. I mean, that at times can be absolutely a part of that experience, but it's recognising that pain is influenced by a multitude of factors. And when, our mood and how we're feeling, our previous experiences with painful experiences perhaps, or our previous experiences with healthcare practitioners or Pilates instructors or personal trainers or whatever it might be, our family members, all have an influence to how we're going to perceive the sensory information that's coming from our body, but also the experience within our environment that we find ourselves in when we're experiencing pain. And so when we kind of look at pain through this more contemporary lens, that, hey, there's lots of factors here that's going to influence someone's pain and how they're going to behave and how their potential recovery is going to occur, treatment and the way we talk about pain needs to reflect that if we're going to do a really good job of that. Whereas our non-contemporary, so our older way of understanding pain was that if we hurt a body part or we experience pain in our leg, for example, then we go, all right, it's because I've got a tear in my hamstring, and then until that tear in my hamstring is repaired or fixed by someone or whatever, that pain's going to persist. And that way, treatment, obviously, to reflect that, needed to be really focused on that one tissue. It kind of ignored all of the other complexity that was going on. And if that person's pain continued to persist beyond normal healing times of that tissue, then we were kind of lost to, what do we do with this individual? It's like, oh, maybe they haven't healed correctly, or maybe they need surgery now. And so we just step up the type of treatment to fix that tissue. And I think that the broad data now suggests that when we do that, people start falling through those cracks at an alarming rate, and they're not getting the care and treatment or help and assistance that they need to be able to actually recover from what is quite a complex experience.
So this is the shift from a biomechanical or a biomedical model of thinking about pain to what's called the biopsychosocial model, and the biomedical model, or the in our neck of the woods, because we're not really medical. The biomechanical model of pain basically says pain is an indicator of some kind of damage in the body somewhere. There's wear and tear. There's an injury. There's something grinding or crushing or pressing or squeezing or whatever where it shouldn't be. And so if you're hurt, that's because there's a problem in the spot that you're perceiving the pain in. Whereas the biopsychosocial model says that we have inputs from our nervous system that might say there's pressure or there's vibration or there's temperature or there's chemical changes going on in a body part. There might be inflammation or whatever it might be. And then we process that within the context of a bunch of other inputs. So it's like, okay, have we ever experienced this sensation before? Are we, what's the health of the organism? Are we run down, stressed, tired, frightened, etc.? And then the brain, outside of our conscious awareness, comes to a decision about whether that input is, represents danger, represents a threat, and if so, motivates us to do something about it by causing us to experience pain.
Absolutely. So it's just so many more factors to it than just that one thing in our biomechanics. And it's not to say that biomechanics don't play a role, but how we kind of talk about that is probably really important to consider within this biopsychosocial model, because if we tell people they have bad biomechanics, or if you keep moving like that, you're going to have an injury, that's probably going to be one of those factors that influences how we perceive our body when we are having a painful experience, or it might increase the likelihood even that we experience pain or threat to us as an organism, as a person, when we are in a position that we've been told is bad for us, perhaps.
So this sounds like some wacky out there hippie shit, Brendan. Like, it sounds like too many acid tabs at fucking Womadelaide last year. And, where are you coming up with this?
Is that what you've been up to, Brendan, in Adelaide?
I did go to Womadelaide, but there was no acid tabs.
There was no acid tabs.
And not just because we had to wear masks. It was just one of those things that just didn't happen.
So, it's not like the World Health Organization endorses this view or anything, is it? Like, is this just kind of some left field stuff that you and Lorimer have cooked up? somewhere? Or?
That's it. You know what? And I think that's what I found really difficult about, these ideas early on, when we were so drawn into that biomechanical or biomedical model for the way we treated and talked about things, was it seems so airy-fairy. It's like, how could someone's environment influence their pain or their experience and how they behave? Or how could how they think or a thought, that's nonsense. What wishy-washy concepts. And and that's the thing, is there is so much compelling data now, and absolutely guideline care. And when we talk about guidelines, obviously, I've heard you speak about this quite a lot, Raf. This is not just someone's opinion. This is vast amounts of data and research being evaluated to go, all right, what do we understand? From all of this information. And we've got great data to suggest, absolutely, social factors and our environment can absolutely have very, very meaningful impacts on someone's trajectory. The way they think and their thoughts and ideas, what they're told, what they're exposed to, are going to have really meaningful effects. And our biology has really meaningful effects. But I guess the broader sense of it as well is you cannot separate these three things. As soon as you separate the social from the psycho or the bio, you cease to exist as a human being. So if we take away your environment, you're in space. You've got nothing around you. There's no situation where that exists. But when you are in, let's say you have a surprise party thrown for you, walking into that surprise party, the biology that occurs is phenomenally complex. There is a cascade of things going on. There's obviously thoughts as well, but those thoughts, they're just biological, physiological processes that are occurring. So, when you think something, your biology is absolutely affected by that. When you're in a positive environment, your biology is absolutely affected by that. If you're in a negative environment, once again, your biology is affected by that. They're so intertwined. And, the guidelines and the research really reflect how important understanding that principle is when we are working with human beings in just movement, everyday things, not even in the context of pain, but very much as well in the context of pain and treating human beings.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, and throw it back at me if you're not familiar with it. But I'm betting you are familiar with Lorimer's study from early 2000s, I think, with the famous arm blowing up CRPS study, where they basically had people with arm pain, they're strapped into a jig on a table. And can you talk us through how, just because you said our thoughts affect our biology, right? So when we talk about this biopsychosocial model of pain and how you feel about your experience affects your pain, man, it's like, that sounds like some woo-woo fucking bullshit. It's like, what, is it psychological? Am I just imagining it? Am I making it up? Is it some hippie fucking shit? No, this is actual.
No offense to hippies.
This is hard biology, right?
I'm a Steiner kid, Raph. Come on, man. Feeling a bit thrown under the bus here. Thrown under the rainbow crocheted bus.
And I think we've all been there, Chloe. I went and lived with because of the era that we grew up in, I lived with my mum in a fucking ashram in Bangalore.
Did you?
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yeah, so it was the 70s, man. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I was such a little hippie kid.
So been there, done that, got the fucking pixie dust to prove it. But, I'm over it now. This notion of the biopsychosocial approach, like you say, Brendan, it can be kind of nebulous, it can sound kind of airy-fairy, but, in all seriousness, like you say, the biology, the psychology, which just means our thoughts and emotions, and the social aspect, which is our environment, the social mores, the zeitgeist, the relationships that we have with people, all of that they're not three separate things. They're truly not even intertwined. They're three components of a whole person, And yeah, so can you talk us through Lorimer's freaking brilliant arm experiment?
Yeah, absolutely. And they are such compelling studies that, I think for me, really bridged that gap. And so that particular study, they took people with complex regional pain syndrome in their upper limbs, and it's a really painful condition, like painful to move. And essentially they had these people lay down and in a relaxed position. They put EMG on their arms and their hands to...
So that's electrical sensors to detect any muscle activity?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, yeah. So just to make sure that these people weren't moving and they could control for that. And then they had these individuals think about a painful movement, like literally just think.
I think they showed them pictures of people's hands in different positions and said, can you imagine, bending your wrist this way or that way, sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they've asked them. So wait, they asked them to think about something painful first, and then showed the photos.
Oh, Raf can probably talk to it better than I can. It's been a little while since I've read the study, but essentially, generally, the gist was looking at something without moving. They're thinking about it. So
gotcha.
The process is thinking about it, and
thinking about moving. Right? They just think about bending your wrist. Think about extending your wrist. Think about making a fist.
Yep. Absolutely. So we know, it's just a thought, which, like we talked about, is, there's a physiological response there. And they looked at the amount of sort of inflammation as basically a proxy of that was circumference of, I think, the thumb or one of the fingers. I can't remember. Raf, you might remember. And also that person's pain levels as well. And as soon as they started, in comparative to the baseline measures, before they even looked at anything, once they'd looked at something, their pain level increased significantly, and that swelling, that circumference of those fingers, that inflammatory response occurred. So we had this physiological response to literally a thought. That physiological response was happening in the periphery. And I think, how cool is that a thought can have such a profound effect at protecting us in such a peripheral level. It's not just that let's just change our behavior based on that thought. It is no, we're going to have this neuroimmune cascade of events occurring that start to protect us. Make sure we've got what we need to help protect our body on even a cellular level.
And I just love that study. And but everybody listening to this will have had an experience of thoughts changing their physiology. Like, if you'd imagine your favourite food, right, you start to salivate and you get hungry, right? Well, that's physiology changing as a result of you thinking something. And if, you think about someone you love, you start to feel certain physical sensations, your physiology changes. If you think about something sad or, depressing, your physiology changes. This is an experience that we have almost on the daily, most of us. And, so it shouldn't be a surprise, I guess, probably is a surprise, but it shouldn't be a surprise, like in hindsight, that it happens not just in relation to food or interpersonal relationships, but in probably every aspect of our existence, So, and that gets us onto this notion of Nocebo, which Chloe mentioned at the start, which is basically where, we expect something to be unpleasant or painful or harmful, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, part of that, and it's tempting to think of that as just like psychological or all in your mind or you're imagining it, whatever. But it's actually, no, there's physiology involved, like your body actually changes its, properties.
There's a really interesting case report from, I think it was 2011. And I thought that's a really cool, it's just a sample of one, obviously, with it being a case report, but really cool, I guess, illustration of the nocebo. And it was about a guy who had enrolled in a clinical trial, so a randomized controlled trial where one of the groups was getting a antidepressant and the other group was getting a placebo. So, everyone thought they were getting an antidepressant, but one group was getting a placebo. Anyway, this guy, he'd started the trial and he ended up having a fight with his partner, and they broke up, and they were, having big issues. And he decided that he would take all of his prescribed trial medications, all of the antidepressants, and just try and overdose. He's just like, I've had enough, I'm just taking them. Took him, and then the report from the emergency department was essentially this gentleman walked in and said, help me, I've taken all of my medication, all of my antidepressants, help me, and then collapsed. So actually went unconscious. His blood pressure had dropped. They, obviously rushed him through and whatever, and they had the bottle. And so they were like, oh, okay, well, let's get in contact with the researcher here and find out. And the researcher went and looked him up and said, oh, wait, does he actually have the drug, or does he have the placebo drug? Turned out he had been prescribed the placebo. But the meaning that he had subscribed to those pills had a proper physiological response. So there was a behavior to go and seek help based on what he thought the meaning of taking those pills were, but also his physiology changed in expectation, in meaning from taking those as well. So a drop in blood pressure, drop in, his vitals across the board. And it wasn't until the lead researcher came in and said, hey, look, I've just checked. What you've done is taken the placebos. You're assigned to the placebo group. You're going to be okay. And then within minutes, all of his vitals returned back to baseline and normal, and he was completely fine and safe. And I think that just really talks to what a nocebo is, the amount of meaning that we assign to something that may not have an actual active ingredient within it. And that active ingredient could be the thing that we think is the reason why an exercise works, perhaps, or whatever else that happens in our world.
And a placebo, of course, is just a pretend. It's basically just a sugar pill or whatever that has no active ingredient at all. And it's just got a label on it that says, powerful antidepressant medication, do not
I would
exceed
argue,
one
though,
tablet
that
per
it
day.
wasn't overly working for him, and I would hope that he actually got some help after that.
Yeah, it was early on in the trial. I don't think he'd really been taking it as well. But
we've one of the things when we teach this subject in our diploma, we present a few studies. We look at a few studies in the placebo arms of clinical trials, because all clinical trials for medications these days always have a placebo arm. So half the people. Everyone thinks they're getting the drug, but only half the people are getting the real drug. Half the people are just getting a sugar pill or a saline injection or something like that. And it's very. So we have very good research on placebo. It's very well researched. There's quite a significant dropout rate in these trials for people who have side effects in the placebo group.
Wow.
But so people are taking these, whatever medications, pain medications, cancer medication, whatever trial they're in, are experiencing like side effects that are so significant, whether it's dizziness, nausea, headaches, lethargy, flu-like symptoms, foggy mindedness, whatever it is, the symptoms that they experience as a side effect of an inert sugar pill.
Right,
because
but they're being told
they expect,
that these could be the
it says
side
it on the
effects.
bottle, right? Watch out for these side effects: dizziness, nausea. Do not operate heavy machinery.
I don't know about you two, but I definitely look at side effects on things, and I must admit, when I take something, I think, I'm pretty sure I'm having that side effect. Oh, I'm definitely having that side effect. That's me. I do. I'm better off actually not looking at the potential side effects of things, honestly, because otherwise I start to.
Well, maybe they could just write, instead of you might get really sick and nauseous, they could write like side effects. You might become awesome.
You might be super awesome. Do you remember, Raph, you told me about the study where you actually, what was it about, the generic brand versus the name brand of a painkiller, etc.?
Well, so, we know that placebo's a real thing. It's a real effect. It's well documented, and it's a component of every, treatment, right? So even treatments that are the drug, people taking the actual drug, there's some component of their benefit that they get is because they expect to get benefit. And then there's also a component that's due to the actual pharmacological action of the molecule. So you can't separate out the placebo effect. But in some trials I found that, and I don't have them in front of me, but it basically, when you take like real, say, paracetamol, which I think in the US they call acetaminophen, the name brand in Australia is Panadol. So you can buy the Panadol, which is 500 milligrams of paracetamol, or you can buy the off-patent, generic brand one, which is the exact same 500 milligrams of paracetamol, but it's just called like Pharmacist's own brand or something like that, and it's in just a cheap brown cardboard.
Doesn't have the sexy font. It's just like the cheap ass font.
Right. Or the multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns or any of that stuff. Or the shelf placements down the bottom of the shelf in the pharmacy. And it's, it's half the price or whatever. It doesn't relieve pain as effectively, right? Even though the active ingredient is exactly the same.
Since you told me that, I have not been able to accept the generic brand. You've cost me money with that bit of information you gave me.
But I've got you more effective pain relief.
I've gone in and I've been like, they're like, would you like the generic brand? And I'm like, I can't take that because it's not going to work as effectively because psychologically. And they're like, I've had some pharmacists just look at me like, are you nuts? And I'm like, no, there's studies on it. They're like, wow, okay, if you want to spend like however much more, be our guest. I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy. Thanks, Ralph. So we've probably just done that to all our listeners now as well. No one's going to be able to buy the generic brand anymore.
Well, I got placeboed, so I use generic brand now because I got placeboed on a plane flight. This was back in the days when we used to get on planes. Remember we used to just get on planes and fly places?
Wow, I can't even imagine it anymore.
I think, Brendan, you used to travel a fair bit. I used to, to travel to teach interstate, pretty regularly. Like 2 weekends a month, I'd be on a plane, from interstate. And one time I was sitting next to this woman. We started chatting, and it turns out she was a pharmacist. So that my ears perked up because I'm like, oh, I'm into, biology, and so we started talking about stuff. And towards the end of the flight, I said to her, look, all right, so what's your hot tip? What's the best pain relieving medication? I've got a headache, what do you take when you got a headache, right? And she said, 2 Nurofen, which is ibuprofen, 2 Panadol, which is paracetamol or acetaminophen, and an espresso. And she said that is, that is the, I can't remember the word she used, but that's like the gold standard, that's what all the pharmacists take, right, when they've got a real bad headache. And I'm like, okay, duly noted. And so, ever since then, anytime very rarely I have a headache or whatever, but a toothache or whatever, I just like, bam, 2 home brand ibuprofen, 2 home brand paracetamol and an espresso. Feel better straight away, even before there's any chance for me to digest any of that stuff. Just real better. So thank you, pharmacist, who I met on the plane.
I feel like that's what I'm going to have to do now to get the same effect that I've been getting from the no name. You're costing me money now, Raph. Like, what are you doing to us?
And I'm sure all of this is so beyond our scope of practice. So, we're like full disclaimer here. Only we're not advising that you take any of that.
No, I'm just telling you the advice I received on the plane.
Yeah, well, look, since you gave me that advice, since I've heard that story, that's been my combo as well, Raph, and it's freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. Hard to get to sleep though. So Brendan, there's this contemporary understanding of pain, which is that it's a biopsychosocial phenomenon. In other words, it's not just pain equals tissue damage. There might be no tissue damage. In fact, the International Association for the Study of Pain, like, imagine how fucking nerdy you have to be about pain, right, to be in the International Association for the Study of Pain.
Brendan would be in it happily.
Are you a member, Brendan?
I bet Brendan's trying to get onto the board.
Can I plead the fifth or whatever it is?
Brendan's like the most pain nerdy person. I love you, Brendan.
Anyway, so
Like,
there's this thing.
for our listeners, I don't know, if anyone is watching a video of this, behind Brendan at the moment, there are these space-looking helmet devices on the wall that measure brain stuff.
Yeah, they're just EEG caps. I don't use them myself. It makes me look smarter, though, if I have them behind me. I'm placeboing you right now. But yeah, it just looks at activity of the brain. So, our lab can look at, brain activity during different experiments and activities and whatever. So yeah, that's a part of what our lab does.
I just wanted to flesh out how into pain Brendan is. That came out really rough.
Can you reel off the IASP, the International Association for the Study of Pain, definition of pain for us?
The new one, the latest one.
The new one, yeah.
I delivered it on the weekend. I might even be able to. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, really? How about you go first? Because I reckon you've got a higher chance of getting it right than me.
It's got to be the updated version, though.
Yeah, no, you're putting me on the spot here. But essentially, the take-homes, it's an emotional and sensory experience that's associated with or resembles that of tissue damage. So when we do, have tissue damage, we can
or described in terms.
Or described in terms. Thank you. That's great. Lucky to have you here, Chloe.
Thank you.
In fact,
Thank you. I'm not just here for the lols.
Maybe you should join the IASP.
And the radio head. Thanks for that. What was that?
I think we've got a new head of pain nerd in this little group we've got going on here. So well done, Chloe.
Thank you.
But yeah, good job. But yeah, it resembles that of or described in terms of such as tissue damage. And I think that's the important thing, or one of the important parts of that definition is that it doesn't require tissue damage to experience pain. And that there isn't this one-to-one ratio between tissue damage and pain. And that it is this emotional component to it and sensory. And I think we often forget about that complexity of it. And yeah, if we are just treating biomechanics, then we're probably not treating, the person's pain experience, or treating the person rather.
And that's the thing, Brendan, that, you and I have talked about this before. In fact, you and I did a little Instagram live on this exact topic, which was super cute of us, maybe like 2 years ago or something now, where we talked about the fact that you cannot have one without the other. You can't. There's still that perception that if it's an acute injury, if you fall over and you've broken your leg, then it is literally just biology. That's it. That is the only thing that is impacting on your experience of pain in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I think we can all remember something where we've hurt ourselves, where we go, yeah, there's definitely been tissue damage there. Like,
mate, if you break your leg freaking hurts, right? Like it does. Right. Like there's no denying that it does. But my perception of breaking that leg, and this is how I describe it to my students, is, well, also, what other context is there around me breaking my leg? What does it mean to me to have broken my leg? Is breaking my leg meaning now I can't work? I've got no one to look after me, or, I've got no income coming in, or have I broken my leg and that's okay. I've got sick pay, and I've got, loved ones who are going to make me soup and look after me, and all, like it's all going to kind of go into. Am I doing an okay job with this? Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think when we think about those thoughts that you're bringing up there, Chloe, are, they're really important elements of, how is this person going to behave, or how are we going to behave in our rehabilitation to get back to the things we want to be doing? Because if we think, oh my God, my career's over, what am I going to do? How am I going to, the family, maybe you become quite despondent and, you're not that engaged in your rehabilitation plan. So if we, from a healthcare perspective, are kind of acknowledging that and trying to gauge how this person is thinking about their situation, their issue, then they're going to, it's going to come up with a lot of meaningful information that becomes tangible in how do we help support this person to having a really positive recovery with healthy beliefs around their body and their environment, and, returned to their lifestyle. And if we just ignore that, like as if they're not important, then we start telling them that they've failed rehab and all of these other nasty things that I think is really quite unfair, especially if we've not taken the time to treat them as a person. We've just treated their tissue.
And we see this a lot, and our listeners who are working with clients in a clinical setting, etc., would see this a lot when the client comes in with the scan that reads like a page long of all these scary words. And I think, Brendan, the most recent one I spoke to you about was my dad, who went in, and they were concerned that he might have a break in his arm, and they went in and, so they scanned. They should have just been looking for that, and instead they gave him this like kind of 2-page report. My dad's 67. He's got some general, changes in there that most, people as they age would have. He's a very fit, healthy, strong man who works out like 3 times a day, genuinely. And he got that report, and literally he read that report and he went, "Oh, my elbow's fucked. It's fucked. You wouldn't believe all the things that are wrong with it, Chloe." And I said, "Okay, let's." I said, "I'm going to," and this is probably fed into the Therapeutic Alliance. I said, "I'm going to get Brendan to look at this." I said, "Brendan works with some of the top pain researchers in the world, Dad." And Dad's like, "Okay, yep, get Brendan, send it to Brendan." And I know I sent it to you, Raf, too. And Brendan, your advice to Dad being like, this is a shit report. There was no need for them to tell you all of this and all of that. Actually, Dad went, "Oh, it's just normal stuff, isn't it? It's just like I've got, it's just normal stuff that happens as you age. I need to crack on." And the next thing I know, I get a call from him kind of like a week or 2 later, because I told him, he needs to do gradual building back up, etc. Probably rested a bit. There was potentially a little break in there, etc. And he goes, Chloe, I listened to your advice. I just did 10 planks on it today, just 10 instead of my normal. And I went, "Okay, Dad, we might need to not do 10 planks on it just yet. Give the tissue time to heal." But it was that change in perception from catastrophizing and being basically noceboed with all this unnecessary, scary shit. So de-threatening, I think that's a really important thing when we're thinking about pain, and then we're thinking about, will someone be despondent to what's going on to them, and it's like, "Oh, fuck it, my elbow's fucked now, it's not going to get better. I'm older, so there's absolutely no chance it's going to get better," etc. As opposed to, right, okay, sure, yeah, there is some tissue damage here. We can calm it down, build it back up. It will heal. You are resilient. You are adaptable. Right? And how can we, and I think that then segues beautifully into talking about the idea of human beings being anti-fragile. I'd love to hear about that.
I love it. Nice segue.
Thank you. Seamless, I thought.
Yeah, so it's a really nice concept, I think, this anti-fragility, which is kind of the opposite of fragility. Nicholas Taleb Nassim, I think, is the author's name, who wrote the book Anti-Fragile. And it's the idea is, a lot of our society, when we're talking about in the context of human bodies and recovery and exposure to our environments, that we talk about our bodies as being fragile, that we kind of wear out. So phrases and metaphors like wear and tear and the body like a machine, I think are really common in our society, and they kind of resemble a more of a fragile idea.
It's like if you do too many. I'm thinking along the lines of McGill and Locke here. I should never have said his name on air, and I'm thinking bit of Andrew Locke there, and thinking about the repeated, the classic that they love to hold on to, that the repeated flexion or the repeated flexion under load, and you are ultimately going to wear your disc's out and you're going to have an injury, as opposed to build up your tissue capacity to that movement pattern and that load, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we put out the caveat, there is a point where tissue, has a finite capacity as well. So we can go through that and break down tissue that can occur. But given that, when we talk about something fragile, it'd be something like a glass, right? That it doesn't like volatility. It doesn't like noise and, pressure on it. So what we tend to do is we put it in the cupboard and we put it away from things that are volatile, that could break it. That's kind of, if we think about that in the terms of a lot of people in pain, they become fear avoidant. They go, oh my God, my body's broken. There's something wrong with it. I need to avoid certain activities or the activities that created this issue in the first place.
And certain movements. I avoided flexion for over 12 months when I originally hurt my back.
If you think flexing forward is going to wear out your spine, then why would you do it? It's common sense to actually avoid that, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you've got this underpinning understanding of the body as being fragile. Mm-hmm. Same as knee valgus, or your shoulders having to adopt a certain kinematic movement pattern to be able to lift anything overhead. Whatever it might be, they sort of all reinforce this idea that we're potentially fragile if we do it wrong. Whereas we've got lots of evidence, it's beyond that we aren't fragile as human beings. We're nothing like a car that wears out over time, that needs parts replacing. In fact, we're a human organism where we adapt to stress, we adapt to volatility. And like I said, there is a limit to that at once. But if we kind of gradually expose the loads and the stresses to us, and that's not just necessarily like the physical load of a weight or a spring on a reformer, it can be, the stresses from, work and our lifestyle and everything else that's going on, that we can adapt to these and that we can become, essentially stronger and healthier when we do engage with this. So rather than wear and tear, it's like wear and repair, and we become more what we call anti-fragile.
And in fact, if you're listening to this and you're an exercise professional, you make your whole living by this concept of people exposing people to controlled stress in the form of exercise to elicit a response to them, of them becoming more robust, more tolerant of that stress. When you expose a muscle to a stress, if you expose it to not enough stress, well, the muscle shrinks, it atrophies, gets weaker. If you expose it to too much stress, it tears. If you expose it to just the right amount of stress, it gets stronger. And so, it's not a case of, we've got to protect the body from wear and tear. It's the case of we've got to choose how much stress we apply. Because if we put ourselves in a flotation tank or something wrapped in cotton wool for a year, you wouldn't be healthier at the end of that experience. Apart from being stark raving insane, your bone density would be reduced, your muscles would be atrophied, you'd be in terrible shape physically. And likewise, if you have never exercised and all of a sudden decide to run a marathon every day, 5 days a week, well, that's going to overload your tissues and you are going to cause some damage. But if you work up to it, over weeks, months, and years, you can achieve incredible feats of strength, endurance, flexibility. People lift 5 times their body weight. People run hundreds of miles through the desert. People do incredible stuff.
And I think too, and I think about that, Raf, also the incredible, I've been really following Cody's journey. Cody Jussel, who's going to be one of our trainers, she's fantastic. She's in the States and she works with a lot of adaptive athletes. And she has just come back from assisting the adaptive, the CrossFit Games, and particularly focusing in on the adaptive participants and what they can do adaptation-wise with missing limbs, etc., is freaking phenomenal. I highly suggest following an Instagram page called I Am Adaptive. If you think that the human body is fragile and you think that it matters if you've got one shoulder that's a little bit higher than the other or you've got one leg that's a smidge shorter than the other, are you freaking kidding me? So yeah, get around it.
Yeah, go and watch
I'm excited. Sorry, Raph. I'm just so excited about the Paralympics coming up because I think it is one of these awesome events that really speaks to actually how anti-fragile human beings are, how incredibly capable humans are to adapt to these stresses and volatility that we're exposed to. And you know, we can live with scoliosis, we can live without limbs, we can just do incredible things when we're exposed to it. And yet when we come to the context of exercise prescription, we think as soon as you go into a little bit of, you know, knee valgus or
anterior pelvic tilt or
that we're going to wear our body out is, you know, quite, like as you said, Chloe, I think quite a ridiculous or not ridiculous if everything you've been exposed to so far is about all the things that can go wrong in the human body and how fragile we are, then it actually probably makes all the common sense in the world, because this is exactly how I was trained. You know, through an exercise physiology degree, you're taught about everything that can go wrong with the human body. You don't really talk too much about all the things that can go right and how we can adapt. I mean, other than actually just prescribing load, like Raf talked about there, in terms of, you know, prescribing, you know, that Goldilocks principle, that's getting the sweet zone of the right amount of load where they do adapt to it and that sort of thing. But in terms of like the biomechanics and that, we do adapt to these things, and it's, you know,
it's pretty nuts still. Like it's still, so it's pretty prevalent still in the Pilates stratosphere. Obviously not with our Breathe EDU students and grads, or with, I would say, a lot of our listeners, because our listeners are proving to be extremely cognitively agile and adaptive themselves, which has been freaking awesome. But what I have noticed, it's still, just when I think the nonsense is over, like I'll get a direct message from, for instance, I got a direct message the other day from a current student who had put up a post on her Insta of her doing, I think it maybe was some variations of double kick. So, for instance, laying prone, clasping hands behind back, and then lifting into extension. And as per good old JP in Contrology, and when I say JP, I'm referring to, of course, Joseph Pilates, you know, full expressions of movement. So, you know, if you're going into extension, you are also going into extension of the cervical. Like, eyes are up and back. It's not this whole like, oh, if I'm going to extend my back, but I've got to keep some sort of perceived neutral in my cervical, right? I shouldn't take my eyes back. I should be looking straight ahead. And quite a prominent Pilates instructor, and by prominent I mean very large following, slid into her DMs and said, "Oh, just because I'm a bit of a stickler for alignment, I just wanted to give you a tip. Really, you should just be looking straight ahead." And I love that. I love so much that our student felt empowered to very respectfully write back and say the reasons why she wasn't doing that and why she felt empowered to actually look back and look up. And then it was so awesome. She sent me a screenshot of that and said, did I answer this right? And I'm like, oh my God, I've never been prouder. Yes.
Oh, that's great, Chloe.
But it's like, who thinks, do you know what I mean? Like, seriously, what sort of fucking damage, I'm sorry, but what damage am I going to do by bloody looking behind me as opposed to straight ahead? No, but seriously.
There's
no load, there's no...
But we have these kind of paradoxical, views, like we talked about it in an episode ages ago, good and bad muscles. It's like good and bad body parts to move, right? So it's like, who wants more hip mobility? Me. Who wants more...
Flex the shit out of your abs, that's fine, but...
Yeah, so it's great to flex your hip, but it's not good to flex your spine. It's great to extend your hip, but it's not great to extend your neck, So we have these kind of paradoxical... if we extend our hips, that's good. If we extend our necks, that's bad. It's like, and why is that? And there's this rule that I imagine what this lady that you was referring to was like, that I heard when I was a kid, figuratively in Pilates, that the cervical spine should follow the line of the thoracic spine, right? Well, we know from research that the thoracic spine only has about 10 degrees of movement from full flexion to full extension. So it's like, but your cervical spine's got fucking 90 degrees, more than 90 degrees.
Right. So what are we doing? Are we wanting to restrict the movement of our cervical? It's just so they can't. So people like that come at it with feeling like it's coming from an anatomical, biomechanical knowledge, but it's actually not. That's the thing. What is it that Greg Lehman says, Raf? The biomechanics.
The biomechanics invalidates the biomechanics. Yeah. But so talk to us about, Brendan, about this idea of antifragility, because I think we have it in some body parts, right? So I'm pretty sure just about everybody in the fitness world, regardless of whether they're whatever their profession is or whatever their bent is, pretty much everyone would agree that if you want to get a stronger biceps, you've got to put load through your biceps. I don't think we'd find that's very controversial. But if we said, okay, if you want to get a stronger neck, you've got to put load through your neck, well, we know that's controversial because we did an episode on it and there was a shitstorm, So, and this applies to other sort of like, quotes, fragile, air quotes, areas of the body like the lower back, that like the shoulder. Sometimes people, get freaked out about the shoulder. Like you said, your scapula's got to move just so, otherwise, don't load it. And whereas, we've got no problems on day one of someone's first exercise class from being sedentary for 10 years, smashing the shit out of their abs, no problem. That's good, right? But we don't use that word. We don't use that approach with someone's neck or their low back or their like, it's just crazy paradox to me. Can you riddle with that for me?
Well, I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? Because like one of the things like we'll often talk about it in some of our courses is, especially in the lower back course, how, we've got this underlying assumption that there's this wrong way to move our back or wrong way to move our neck or move our shoulder. However, it's like, all right, so show me how you move your elbow wrong, right? And then you get these people in the class trying to extend and flex their elbow, trying to figure out actually what's the right and wrong way to do this. They go, all right, now do it with your knee. And then they're there trying to flex and extend their knee, trying to figure out what's the right and wrong way to do that. And then, all right, show me the ankle. Come on, we've got to figure out one of these. But when we come to like the back, and probably the back more than any other area, is like there is this real right and wrong way that we need to move this. And so, and it goes, all right, so where does this come from? Because, if there's a right and wrong way to do the back, but, most of these other joints seem, there isn't a right or wrong way. There's no rule book here. Where does that come from? What's the research actually show? Is there an increase in risk if we move it one way over the other? And that's where it becomes really fascinating is, if we're talking efficiency and injury prevention, and we look at the literature behind that, it's like, well, actually, it starts to fall apart a little bit. So if we create a rule around something and it doesn't actually decrease the likelihood of injury or improve efficiency, then what is it doing? It's creating a constraint. And if we create a constraint that alters the way that person can engage in their environment and the things they can interact with or do, then we've inadvertently created a disability for that individual without even realizing it. All right, so we may have been trying to help and whatnot, but I think this is where it becomes really important that we do sort of engage enough with, what does the literature actually say about this idea that I'm using to help this individual? does it actually do what I think it does? Or am I just assuming it does because someone's taught me this, or that I had read it in an article somewhere? And I think this is a really big part where we can create this fragility, that we can create essentially disability by creating constraints that aren't actually based in science to help prevent injury, to actually help someone maybe even restore function, or even to even be more efficient over time as well. And so I'm really riffing with whatever you asked before right now, Raph. But
I thought that was really powerful, what you just said, Brendan, that we can actually create disability for someone. That's huge.
Yeah, and I think this is something, and I'm 100% guilty of this myself, and I think
I'm sure we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only based on reflection and reading more and more and being engaged in science and reading things, and that I've come to kind of understand the consequences of what we do. And I think it is actually quite profound, even like without my exercise physiology hat on, just as another human being providing any advice on movement or exercise, that it is weighted, that this does influence someone's experiences, the way that they perceive their body, and consequently how they perceive their environment as well. And so it's really about checking ourselves. Where does this information come from? This cue that I'm using, is this actually something that is helpful for someone to move more, to engage more in their environment, to do the things in their world and their life that they find valuable, that they see meaning in? And if it doesn't, when we check that, then maybe we've got to find ways of how do we remove that narrative, that cue, or even that type of exercise from our vocabulary or skill set.
I've told this, I think I've told this story before, but reflecting back on my first training as a Pilates instructor, and which was Stott, and when we had to do all the plumb line tests and the painstaking, like you actually had to find faults with the alignment of the human being in front of you. Like that was kind of part of it. Like
the exercise.
So you had to search for it, and if you weren't finding air quotes faults, do you know what I mean? You weren't going to pass. And I remember, a really good friend of mine came up from Sydney. I was in Melbourne, and I said, I need some help. I'm, studying for my tests, my exams. And I said, can I do a postural assessment on you? And I basically, wrote down 50 million things that, were quote unquote out of alignment. Yeah, and no joke, Brendan, when I was leaving, so at my going away in Sydney late last year, she was there and she goes, hey, Chloe, remember when I came and saw you in Sydney, when I still remember back to when you were first starting to be a Pilates instructor, remember all those things you found that were wrong with me? You never actually fixed them. Like we never got around to fixing them. And so she's gone. So that was like 8-9 years ago. And all this time she's carried around this belief that she has all of these things out of alignment. And apparently I told her that would then lead to back pain and God knows what else, right? And she's gone for all those years now thinking that. And I just sat there mortified.
And you, as a person, as a trainer, you were trying to help her. And I think that's what's really important to remember, that you weren't trying to be a bad person. At the same time, it's like you were doing the best with the knowledge you had at that point in time to help that individual. As was I when I've had exactly the same sort of story.
So where does the response, like I'm riffing a little bit now and I'm trying to think about it more, because we're thinking about, okay, well, yeah, that's right. Like Raphael Bender was my educator and Stott was the syllabus, and I was told this is the way of the world, and I wanted to be, a good student and learn it, and I thought that was the truth, and it was coming to me from a trusted source, right? It was a trusted source. So the responsibility of elevating health literacy and etc., and it's got to lie with the educators, right? at some point. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, because I'm thinking, I'm sitting here right now and I'm thinking about, okay, we know at Breathe Education and what you're doing at the Knowledge Exchange, et cetera, we all know we've elevated, right? And we are presenting to our best knowledge the most current, up-to-date and clinical guidelines, et cetera, current best practice to not freak people out, get people moving fearlessly, et cetera. Yeah, but we are not the norm. Breathe Education is not the norm. I would love it to be the norm, but we simply aren't the norm.
We'd be out of a job if we were the norm. Everyone would be doing it.
But at the same time, so it's like, but we don't want to, but the ultimate goal is, I don't want people going around thinking that they're, ultimately doomed to fucking back pain because they've got an anterior pelvic tilt. Right? And I've said that to someone before. So how do we stop this nonsense?
Well, I think there are two answers I'd like to chip in with, and then whatever you want to add, Brendan. But I think, well, how do we stop it? I think we're doing it, right? We're having public conversations about it. We're educating people. We're sharing. There are copious citations in the show notes of all of our episodes. So we're not just making shit up. We're referring to current, recent, high-quality science. So that's, we're doing it, I think. And, if people want to know more and get more educated, they can come and do a training with us. Or with the Knowledge Exchange, and there are a few others out in the world doing things pretty well. We mention them pretty regularly: Greg Lehman, Adam Meekins, Ben Cormack. There are a bunch of people out there doing good work.
I think, Raf, I'm thinking more. My frustration doesn't. I know there's so many wonderful people out there, and I do believe what I'm seeing in the physio industry is I'm seeing a lot of that actually hurtling forward in a really positive way. What I'm not seeing the same pace. Is in the Pilates stratosphere.
Oh yeah, and personal training, I think, at a play. And if we look at something like
I would agree with
chiropractic, they're stuck in the 1980s still.
Exercise physiology, we still have these things,
And then we've still got low back pain as the leading disability, worldwide.
Opioid prescription epidemic.
People. Catch the fuck up.
I think absolutely I agree with you, Chloe. The responsibility, squarely lies with the educators to update their fucking shit and,
correct.
Teach something that is in line with present national and international guidelines. It's not that. This is what we're talking about today is not fucking cutting edge. Like with this biopsychosocial approach to pain has been enshrined in the Australian national guidelines since 2005. This is 3/4 of a fucking almost like 15 years. This is old. Not cutting edge.
And Louis
science.
Gifford was pioneering it. Wasn't that back in the
1990s?
Yeah.
But. So, all right, yes, so absolutely educators, get your shit together, please. But here's the thing. If you're a consumer of education, if you're an instructor out there and you're looking for ongoing education, whether you're a Pilates instructor, a physio or, personal trainer or whatever, and don't even get me started on yoga, but, what I see when I look around a lot of educators is they are advertising on the packet. It says science-based. Right, it says we use modern science, and then you look under the hood, and it's like, oh yeah, this.
We also cover alignment protocols, and we cover posture types, and we cover cross slings, and we cover bullshit.
Cutting edge stuff from the 1940s and 50s, right? About this, based on a biomedical model of. Pain equals tissue damage and posture equals muscle balance, and we can correct posture by blah, 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 blah. And actually, yes, that was good science, literally 3/4 of a century ago. But, now it's well and truly outdated. It's well and truly debunked. It's not best practice by any stretch of the imagination. So how can people as consumers, when they look on the packet, we're saying our education science-based, the knowledge education is saying we're science-based, and then, XYZ training school who's teaching fucking postural analysis, Reiki and fucking chakra alignment is also saying our education is science-based. And so how's a relatively uneducated consumer, who's not a scientist, to tell the difference? Well, I would say, key things that you need to look for and you need to ask your educator are, is your curriculum in line with current national guidelines, right? If they stare at you like they don't know what the fuck you're talking about, that's all the answer you need, right? And secondly, could you send me some examples of citations, research papers that you refer to in the course, and you should be looking for research papers that are what's called systematic reviews or meta-analyses. Okay, so these are reviews of the whole totality of the literature in an area, and they should be 5 years old or younger, right? So something in the last 5 years that is a systematic review or meta-analysis, and it should also be in line with current guidelines. So if you pull out one study from 1963 or something with 12 participants in it that found posture analysis was, useful or whatever, that's not science-based, right? What you need is a 2020 meta-analysis looking at the totality of the literature over the last 60 years and summing up, okay, what's everything science knows about this summed up in one paragraph. What do you got, Brendan?
I love it, mate. I could listen to you all day. It was just reminding me of, I think Lars Ave Marie put a little snippet up of, I think he's an Irish comedian, the other day. And
Lars is not an Irish comedian. He's a Danish comedian.
Oh, Lars is. And it was titled, or the snippet of this guy's stand-up was titled, "Science Doesn't Know Everything." And he's going on about it. It's like, and I hate it when people say, well, you know what, science doesn't know everything. And his response to that was, yeah, I know, science wouldn't exist if it thought it knew everything. Like the whole idea of science is about asking questions and filling them in the gaps. Just because there's still gaps about things we don't know doesn't mean that you can go and just fill in those gaps with whatever fairy tale you want, right? And I just thought it was just so well communicated of like, actually the purpose of science is to really figure out, what is the closest understanding of reality can we get? So what we are doing reflects reality and starts to take out all of as much of the bias as we can and all the perceptual inferences that our brains, do, that are so flawed in so many ways. I mean, they're incredible, don't get me wrong, but we are so flawed in many ways, and science can really show us, all right, what actually explains what we're seeing. And if we're not using that and we're just relying on our own clinical experience, what we see happen when we, prescribe an exercise and someone feels better, the reason why they're feeling better is probably not for the reason that you think it is. And that's what science can start to help us understand, so that we can cut the crappy stories that we tell people, that we can get rid of the crappy interventions or things that actually it's not because of that specifically that help that individual. Then we can actually use the things that are meaningful and helpful and that help people to engage in their world again, or to actually just live happy, healthy lives without fear of their bodies or their environment.
Like Richard Feynman said, the Nobel laureate physicist, I think he won it in 1962 or 64 or something for theoretical physics, and a great teacher. I just love him. He said, "You must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool."
So true, isn't it?
We all, and he's just talking about the fact that we come up with our belief systems, and then we look for evidence to confirm what we already want to believe. That's just how human, you, me, Chloe, everybody listening to this, everybody behaves this way, and it's basically built into our genetics that we do this. It's kind of hardwired into how our brains work. But science is our best tool. It's not perfect, but it's a gazillion times better than the next best thing that we've got. It's our best tool for avoiding that or minimising that, tendency that we have to just look for evidence that supports what we already want to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like our identity and like how we identify as a person and the groups that we identify with play like an important role in that as well. Like for me, like, you know, if you think, you know, I identify as a Pilates instructor and that's like the core thing that I want to fit into, and, you know, to be a Pilates instructor to you means to be able to correct people's exercise and give, you know, all of these 100 cues and prescribe exercise to look a very specific way, then of course you're going to conform to that. You're going to do those sorts of things. But if you shift your identity to, actually, I want to identify as someone that helps someone move as freely and as fearlessly as they possibly can, all right, with the best quality information that I can expose myself, then you're going to behave in a way that reflects that. That means that you can be flexible in updating your understanding of something, that you can say, oh, you know what I was doing last week? That actually isn't the best information. I'm okay with that. I feel vulnerable enough that I can say, hey, I found something better because it fits with my identity. It's like, so I'm going to do this behavior now. And I think that for me was a really, really powerful when I go, you know what, I don't identify as an exercise physiologist, because if I do, then for whatever happens, regardless of that person's needs, I'm always going to be prescribing exercise, right? But there's times when people don't actually need exercise. They're already doing, you know, all the exercise in the world, and it's fantastic living healthy lifestyles. And they just need someone to give them some permission that they're doing the right things and their body is healing appropriately and whatever it might be. So,
or to tell them to disregard their Nocebo scan report, for example.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So I think, you know, asking ourselves, you know, what do we identify as? What are the groups that we belong to, and how you know, are they the best groups for what we're trying to achieve and what we value in life? And I think that can be a big thing.
There's an episode of a podcast that Chloe and I have talked about before called You Are Not So Smart, which is all about examining how, you know, people's tendency to engage in what's called motivated reasoning. Basically what we said, you look for evidence of the things that you already basically want to believe, and ignore evidence that they're not true. The latest episode, 212, with Jay Van Bavel, is called The Power of Us, and it's about, just listening to it in the car last night, it's about basically how social identity is the best predictor of beliefs. Like, so if you look in the US, they're talking in the US, but political affiliation is the best predictor of vaccination status in the US, right? So if you're a male Republican, you're way less likely to be vaccinated than any other, you know, group of humans, and that, you know, we all have these social affiliations. So, you know, not interested in talking about Republicans versus Democrats or, you know, vaccination here, but, you know, we all affiliate, you know, so most of us listening to this probably affiliate as, I'm a Pilates instructor, or I'm a yoga instructor, or I'm a physiotherapist, or I'm an exercise physiologist. And therefore, if I'm a Pilates instructor, well, you know, Pilates instructors believe certain things. You know, we believe in core strength, we believe in posture, we believe in correct muscle activation, we believe in cueing certain ways.
I don't believe in any of those things, but yes, I guess that's here we go.
But you know, as like, well, I mean, when I was just, you know, first becoming a Pilates instructor, and I don't know if this is still a thing for young Pilates instructors, because I don't personally perceive it, but maybe it's still totally out there and I just don't notice it anymore. But I felt I had to dress in a certain way. You know, it was all about Lululemons and having a certain look, and, you know, like, you know, I don't know if that's still a thing. It probably is, but I don't give a shit about it anymore. I just wear whatever the fuck I want. But, you know, back in the day, I felt like I needed to fit in and fit a certain image, you know. And I think, you know, that is, and I didn't perceive that as like I feel a pressure. It was just like that's what I did, you know. I aspired to it, right? And just like, you know, when I was a musician in my 20s, I wore a certain type of clothing. I wore, you know, loose-fitting Hawaiian shirts, unbuttoned, and
know,
cut-off denim jeans, and, you know, unshaven and all that. Like, that's what you wear when you're a musician in Byron Bay. Yeah, I've got some photos. I've got a photo of me playing bass at the Byron Bay Music Festival, or in 1999 or something like that.
We need this photo.
Yeah,
this is the stuff for the show notes right now.
Yeah. We need this photo. This photo must be in the show notes. Can you put photos in show notes?
Yeah, I'll link to it.
Okay, yay.
So, you know, and like if I'd gone on stage at the Byron Bay Music Festival wearing a suit and tie, right, that everyone would have looked at me like I'm some kind of weirdo, right? But I was in cut-off army shorts and no shirt, so I was like, yeah, I fit right in because that's what everyone else was wearing, So, and so it's the same with beliefs, right? So, as yoga instructors, as exercise physiologists, whatever, we all inherit certain belief systems. And so it's, I think, like Brendan said, if you're able to step outside that, and this is what made the biggest difference for me, and I think for you as well, Chloe, and I think for you as well, Brendan, is being able to step away from like, I define myself as I do X modality, whatever that modality is, right? And changing that to I define myself as I just do whatever science tells me is the best thing to do, right? And if that's different today than what it was yesterday, well, awesome. It means we got better, I let it go, hold on tightly, let go lightly. It's like, who gives a shit if we stop doing something because we realise it's not the best thing to do anymore? Great. It's no threat to our identity anymore,
There's got to, I'm going to guess there's a lot of, to be able to, well, there's a few things that are important to be able to make that leap as well. There would be things such as the ability, like being cognitively agile, right? And I know that there's quite a lot of studies that have been, there's some studies that I've seen, I shouldn't go quite a lot, in regards to different personality types and whether you're more likely your psychological profile more likely to experience more backfire effect as opposed to being cognitively agile. So there's probably something to be said in there. And then I think
I think if you're listening to this, you're probably doing pretty good.
Yeah. And then I think about, I actually, personally, I don't remember having any difficulty going to doing the next thing that was best practice. But I also know that was because you as my educator, Raf, I literally believe I think my critical skills have developed and I would now question things more so. But before I think I really thought about critical thinking. Exactly. So now I'm more likely to actually question and query and but historically, basically, if you say to me, hey Chloe, this is the way, this is the new thing, this is how we're doing, I'm like, okay, cool, I'm on board, let's go. I trust you. So I guess, we might be seeing certain schools of thought being held back because...
But you shouldn't trust me.
But see, I'm saying, but I've developed since then. I do still, I trust you, but I would also question things if I...
trust me, but you should expect me to bring evidence. You shouldn't just expect me to say, hey, everyone, we're not doing biopsychosocial anymore.
Right.
We're now doing this new thing. You'd be like, okay, that's interesting. Where's the research?
Yeah. So I'm guessing, people that I'm just looking at my hands are going purple. It's quite cool here in Melbourne today. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I just see, there's the McGill crew, or there's the Stott crew, or there's the this crew, and they're just so, they're emotionally tied to it. They're
to a particular narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anywho, I think I'm starting just to get a little bit tired of it. Getting tired of it. It just sometimes feels never ending, the Pilates police showing up with their fucking bullshit alignment protocol and the body as fragile, and it's just like, fuck me, it's 2021.
Change happens one death at a time. I don't know who said that back in the day, but it's like we just have to, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, We're not going to change the hearts and minds of Stuart McGill, et al. As the older generation retire, and I've actually got a lot of respect for Stuart McGill. He's, and I include some of his research in my lectures that I deliver. I disagree with him fairly profoundly on the spinal flexion being dangerous
and his
situation.
Concepts of pain.
But he's a very smart guy, and he's done some amazing research. But yeah, for people who had dyed in the wool, stuck in a particular narrative, we and no one else are gonna influence them. But eventually they'll grow old and retire, and the new generation will come out. And there's copious research that, in physiotherapy, admittedly, but basically that younger generation of better educated, more effective practitioners, more likely to give guideline-based care, more up with biopsychosocial, practice. Like basically the less experienced you are, it seems the more up to date you are, and that's good, right? Because those people are the future of the industry.
And that's
right?
what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing in our students and our grads that are going out there and that would have been quite sort of, I guess, green around the ears, so to speak, and they're out there and they're changing lives with current best practice and fearless movement, and it's incredible to see.
Brendan, anything you want to add to, some great words of wisdom to, cause our listeners to become instantly enlightened?
I don't think I've got the ability to do that. But I was just thinking, as you were both speaking then, just of sort of one last thought. I was running a webinar a few weeks ago, and I'd recorded myself on a reformer doing an exercise, and I purposefully made it look as ugly and as uncomfortable as possible. Lots of knee valgus.
You did that.
Dropping. Yeah, and
so
and
not
so
your normal graceful.
He asked me if I would do it.
Cat-like, kind of execution.
Exactly.
No.
That's it. So I did it myself, Chloe, and it was looked like Bambi on a reformer. But essentially, what I had the participants do was, like, I played that video and I said, how does that make you feel? Watching me do that movement with all this knee valgus, my ankle dropping in, my hips dropping, etc. How does that make you feel? Just write down a couple of adjectives of, what you feel. And, the words were things like horrified, oh, that must hurt, I feel pain in my own knees, things like that.
Wow.
When just watching that.
Wonder if they got inflammation.
I wonder if they got inflammation. Absolutely. we should have strapped them up, immobilized them. And then we kind of delivered the course content and whatnot. And we kind of came back to this as a bit of a reflection task. And I said, it's really interesting how you felt those things, and that your behavior to correct those were, because we also asked that, was, to cue them to push their knee out, to lift their hips, to engage their arches, things like that. That essentially for me, I was actually quite comfortable. Like, it felt like a bit of a weird way to do that particular movement because I'd done it before and now I was doing it differently. But it wasn't painful. It wasn't, any worry in my mind whatsoever that I was going to do any damage or whatever. I was like, oh yeah, this is just a different way of doing it. But based on the way that they felt, not how I felt, but based on the way they felt, they were then behaving in a way to fix me, to align with their internal model of the world, what they perceive to be correct. Now, if what they perceive to be correct isn't actually based in science to be more helpful, more efficient, or reduce my injury of risk, all it is getting me to be more like them. All right?
It's transferring their fear from them to you.
Exactly. So there's this transference that occurs, I think, without us even knowing it. And it comes from a place of being helpful and trying to, help people move better, etc. But what is move better? What is right or wrong movement? And in fact, could we actually just be
that is a deep fucking question. What is move better? Because I see that splashed all over the internet all the time. Oh, move better. But can someone explain to me what that is? Like,
yeah.
And don't tell me no knee valgus without showing me a fucking systematic review that says knee valgus is a problem. Because I can show you a systematic review from 2021 that said it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Pow, pow.
Exactly. So we're not even thinking about, the words we're using, move better. Have we actually thought about what is the definition of move better? Where does that come from? What does that mean? And how do I embody that in my practice or, my as a trainer or whatever it is, the context you're working in? And I just found that like just reflecting back on that transference that occurs, and that if we're not reflecting, if we're not asking questions of why it is I do what I do, then we're going to continue to apply transference onto people who are coming to our classes, who are coming to seek our help, or whatever context it's in. And we're probably going to be a part of the problem.
And this is the topic of your PhD research, right?
Yeah, essentially that it's not just the words we use. Like obviously if I say, hey, Raf, you've got a bulging disc, all right, you should be really careful, that you might behave in a way, you probably won't, but a normal person that doesn't know much about spines, etc., probably is going to behave in a way where they're really guarded, they're going to be really protective, they're probably not going to bend much, right? So we know that our words and our language is loaded and has the ability to influence how someone engages with their life. But more so than that, and something I don't think we talk about enough and that I'm particularly interested in my PhD, is it's not just the words, but the implicit message that's taken away from what we do. So if I tell someone, hey, actually, you're doing, you're doing fine, your spine's strong, it's robust, you were going to heal. I can see that you're a little bit sore right now, but you're safe and let's keep you moving. And then I proceed to give them core stability exercises. All right. Even if I don't use the word core stability, but even unconsciously, they may be taking a message away from that is conflicting with your narrative. And they're probably going to behave in a way that they might not even be aware of that suggests the same. And it might even mean that, let's say 6 months down the track, that they'd recovered from their back pain. Now that back pain comes back. What do? Well, that individual actually gave me a very specific exercise that I had to do in a very specific dosage last time. And it got me out of my issue, what was going on. So I better go back and see them. Right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it may lead to unnecessary healthcare utilization rather than leading to someone feel like, actually, no, my body can heal by itself and it'll adapt. I just got to figure out what can I tolerate right now and start to re-engage with things and have the healthy lifestyle so that we can teach people, that we can help people with those behaviors when they are faced with something difficult. But at the moment, I think we try and take on all the things and have that fixing mindset where we've got to fix everything in some way, shape or form. So, essentially, I'm really interested in not just the explicit message, that we give someone, the verbal part, etc., but actually what we do, how we behave when we prescribe an exercise, when we, do whatever we do, in whatever context we do. Because it's not here just in a physiotherapy clinic or an exercise physiology clinic. I think this happens in personal training and Pilates contexts. And, that's a really powerful place, a very powerful environment to help instill people's confidence in their bodies and having an underpinning philosophy that they do have this anti-fragile organism within them.
Yeah. What a great place to leave it, Brendan. Chloe, you guys are both awesome.
You're awesome too, Raf.
You're both awesome too. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I don't care what they say about you, Chloe. You're all right.
Thanks, Brendan.
See ya.
Bye.
See you guys.